Good day, everyone. We're going to be continuing with your social psychology lectures today. Today we're going to be focusing on the lecture that's correlated with your textbook in this class, which is Chapter 3, Social Beliefs and Judgments. Obviously, some of the pictures that will be on today's presentation will be expounded upon more completely in your text. I will try and give you some extra insight upon those. Your chapter is broken down into 4 sections: perceiving our social world, judging our social world, explaining our social world, and expectations of our social world. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot today about perception versus reality. When we're talking about a social world, it's your idea of what something is interacting with the ideas of others and the actions of others. And we're going to examine that quite closely today to have a better idea of many of the factors motivating behavior, and our perceptions of the behavior of others is sort of the real focus on what we're doing here today, for those of you who are up to date in your reading. So, perceiving our social worlds, as I said, this is all about perception versus reality. We respond not to reality as it is, but to reality as we construe it. So what we believe to be true is the reality we respond to, not to what really is true. And simple example of that would be, everybody has been in a social function, social situation, and you find someone's behavior to be, shall we say, inappropriate. Either they're rude or even something not negative, excessively happy, excessively jubilant at maybe something that doesn't call for that, at an event that doesn't really call for great happiness. And you think that's a strange person, and then someone tells you, oh, that guy just heard that his wife is pregnant, so he's very happy, or that woman just found out that her husband wants a divorce, so she's a little bit sad. And this gives you more information, but we have the perception, the immediate perception, this is inappropriate behavior or unusual behavior. And then when it's explained to us, we now understand a little better, although we'll find out today that that is also going to factor how we judge that person in the future, our initial impression. We have 4 different things that occur that help us with how we perceive reality, and these will be built upon in the next few slides. We have something called priming. This is a word that's used to describe when you load something to get it to work better. So usually you're priming a pump. If you run out of gas, Mamet's ran out of gas on the way to work today, and if you have an older car, sometimes what you'll do is you'll put a little bit of gasoline in the carburetor because the whole gas line is completely empty, so you have to get gas to the carburetor to get the car to start. There's nothing wrong with it. So you are priming the car. What you do when you get in any car, usually fuel injection these days not so much, but it's sort of human nature. If you're my age, when you get in a car, before you turn the key, you hit the gas pedal a couple times. You're priming the fuel system of the vehicle. So the way our brain works, our brain needs priming, and this is going to be developed in the next slide. And then our brain operates in a certain way in terms of perceiving and interpreting events. We have something called belief, perseverance, meaning the permanence of an idea, of a belief, in how we perceive a reality, how we remember certain things, and how memories are constructed. And the construction of memories, as well as how our perception goes, is operated on by these 3 things: the misinformation effect, which we'll build upon today, how we reconstruct our past attitudes, and how we reconstruct our past behavior. That is, how we explain how we felt at the time and how we explain what we did at the time. Okay, little biology lesson here. Here's an example of priming. Priming is activating particular associations in memory. We see the word rabbit. This activates the mental image of a rabbit in our head. This primes the spelling of the spoken word hare, which is a synonym. Hare and hare sound the same. A lot of you, even though your English is very good, you may not know a hare is another word for a rabbit, and essentially it means a wild rabbit. Those of you who watch American television, Bugs Bunny, a very famous animated character, he would be a hare. Typically they're a little bit longer and skinnier than domesticated rabbits. One of the common examples of this, and this resonated with me as I was preparing today's lecture. I just finished reading a book on, it was a criminology book on analyzing criminals and how to get them, how to rehabilitate criminals. It was quite an informative book. I enjoyed it. It was a layman's book. It wasn't, certainly didn't have to be an expert to read it. And one of the things in his foreword that he talked about was, be careful when you read this book not to see yourself as all of these criminals, because it's very easy to do. And he mentioned the common thing when someone goes to medical school and they're reading about diseases all the time, they constantly feel the symptoms of those diseases. They think, maybe I have that, maybe I have that. This is why sometimes when you go online to find out what's wrong with you, you end up thinking everything is wrong with you. There's a popular website in the United States called WebMD.com, and it's very useful for just getting some basic information on what you think might be wrong with you, some common approaches to, say, mild arthritis, things you can do about it. It's nice to be informed before you go see a doctor, but you want to believe the doctor before you believe what you read on the internet. All right, so continuing with perceiving our social worlds, belief perseverance, persistence of one's initial conceptions as when the basis for one's belief is discredited, but an explanation of why the belief might be true survives. So, in America, North America, in Europe, in Christian societies, children believe in Santa Claus. Some of you are familiar, we just had Easter. When children are very young in North America, they believe in the Easter Bunny. The Easter Bunny brings Easter eggs, which I suppose is a better holiday for us to use here since we just had our bunny here. Whoops, there we go. So Easter Bunny we'll talk about instead of Santa Claus. I know most of the folks in here are Muslims. But obviously you're familiar with the concept. It's not a particularly religious holiday in the United States. So children eventually stop believing, but some measure of the magic of Christmas stays with them even into adulthood. There's something special about Christmas, at least in North America. I've never lived in Europe except for once here in Albania, and I was actually in Macedonia for Christmas, where they're all Orthodox and they celebrate it on a different day. It's all quite confusing. And this also explains why just someone being accused of a crime can ruin their reputation. That simply being that we have this initial perception, oh, so-and-so, I was reading today, I don't care about this, but it was an Italian soccer story. And apparently there's a big investigation going on in Italy right now dealing with match fixing, meaning it's guaranteed that one team is going to win and they're going to win by a certain number of points. Whatever the case may be, I don't know how specific it was, but basically so that people can bet, and they're not betting, it's guaranteed. They know who's going to win and who's going to lose. So they arrested a couple guys this morning who are actually on the Italian national team for Series A or Serie A, fixing games. And the saying we have in English is, where there's smoke, there's fire. What that means is you wouldn't be accused of something if you didn't do something wrong. You might not be a murderer, but you probably did something wrong. You were probably involved with something bad. And so this is a difficult problem for someone if you get falsely accused of a crime and you really did absolutely nothing, which is generally a Hollywood scenario. It's much more likely that you kind of did something wrong, but not as serious as the government would have people believe. Perceiving our social worlds, constructing memories of ourselves and our worlds. So let's read this statement together. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Memory can be likened to a storage chest in the brain into which we deposit material and from which we can withdraw it later if needed. Occasionally something is lost from the chest and then we say we have forgotten. Okay, so memory is essentially like a bank, and you put things in the bank, and when it's time to get them out, you come and take them out, and that's fine. So that all works very well. So, do you agree or disagree with this? And most of us would say, we all have this conception, I have a good memory, I have a bad memory. That's usually not true unless you've had something happen to your head, unless you've suffered some great difficulty. The information is there. Some of us are better at retrieving it than others, that's all. We know that from some of our earlier lessons. The information is there, you just have to figure out how to retrieve it. One of the tricks that I learned from reading, actually from reading literature, someone was writing a biography, autobiography I should say, and the title of the biography was Speak Memory. And he was writing about being a child when he was, 65, I forget how old he was when he died, he didn't live that much longer. The guy's name is Nabokov, he's a Russian writer. And he was talking about how when you're going back and spending time in this very distant past, you think you don't remember, and then as you spend time there examining that afternoon, examining if you are 65 or 70, the first time you kissed someone, close the door. The first time that you had a slight romantic relationship, that as you dredge through those memories, you'll start remembering what it was that you ate and what it was he or she was wearing and what song was playing. All of these things will come back to you. But what we know is one thing that we can do, we can also plant memories in people. And those of you who follow courts of law, there's all these cases in North America these days about repressed memories, which things are too terrible for me to remember them, and so I've blocked them out. And they often find out that those memories were invented. They usually have to do with sexual abuse and terrible things like that. And what they've discovered is these are often false memories. These are things people have seen on TV or read in the newspaper, and they start getting confused with their own memories. I think the experiment that I was reading about in preparation for today was if you had people sit down and write a story about a time when they were a child and did something in a somewhat public environment, such as at a wedding or a graduation, and they fell down or they broke something and everyone noticed them, everyone was looking at them and talking about how that child is badly behaved or something like this. If you had them write a scenario like that, something that we can all imagine and might be based in a little bit of truth, but it's not supposed to be true, it's supposed to be fictional, that in many people, that memory became a real memory. They started remembering it as something that happened to them. So, To continue with our perception of social worlds, constructing memories of ourselves and our worlds, children's memories are particularly suggestible, and we'll talk about what we mean by suggestibility. And all memories operate under something they call the misinformation effect, distortions in memory caused by misleading information. Okay, you remember a certain event. I remember talking about one of my best friends. He's currently married. He's been married quite a while, 10 years or so, 12 years, I don't remember. Might be more like 14. He's been married a fair while, and he's been with that woman, his current wife. He's been with her for, it's got to be getting on towards 20 years that they've been dating and subsequently married. Well, when he first went away to graduate school, they were doing the long distance relationship thing, and he had a minor affair. I don't think it was ever actually consummated, but it was certainly infidelity in his mind and something he felt terribly guilty about. And one time I was sitting around talking to him, and I just planted the idea that I had dated that girl too, and never wanted to tell him, and that just completely threw off his self-concept of his own memories. Here I'd thrown some information at him, very rapidly told him, oh no, that's not true, I'm just kidding. And he knows me well enough. But it was an interesting moment to see how that just completely reconstructed how his own view of the past of that particular event, which at that time seemed disastrously significant. Obviously, they got over it. They're still together. They have children. They're happily married. They own a house. They live a good life. We have a quotation here that we'll look at together. You think you don't know who this is, but you do. So a man should never be ashamed to own, which is to admit, is what we're saying here, to admit that he has been in the wrong, that he has been mistaken, which is but saying, in other words, that he is wiser today than he was yesterday. So he's learned more information. This guy, Jonathan Swift, you think you don't know him, but you do. He was the guy who wrote Gulliver's Travels, about the regular-sized human being who went to the island of Lilliput. Gulliver's Travels is actually, Gulliver goes to many different places, and it's sophisticated social commentary. So even though he's best known for having written this famous book, Gulliver's Travels, it was social commentary on English society and the world in general. I would say European society. I'm certainly not an expert on Swift, but he's someone who's much more concerned with society than he is with literature. Very good. So constructing memories of ourselves and our worlds continued. We have a hard time reconstructing our past attitudes accurately. People's memories of past events such as vacations are rated as more pleasant than they were rated at the time of the experience. And we call this rosy retrospection. We have an expression both in French and in English. We talk about viewing life through rose-colored glasses, meaning pink glasses. In French, they say la vie en rose. My French is not that good, but I know that. And it means to have a very optimistic view of things. It's colored by a very positive light. It's happy and pleasant looking. And the reason obviously being, a vacation is supposed to be a good thing. When you look back on your vacation, you're much more likely to remember it as going quite well, when in fact, if I ask you about your last vacation and you just took it, you can say, oh, well, the hotel wasn't as nice as we thought it would be. This happened to me. I just went to Greece. Hotel wasn't quite as nice as I thought it would be. It was not a very good area, so it was a little bit dangerous around there at night. Fortunately, I'm a little bit dangerous, so that wasn't a problem. The food was okay, et cetera, et cetera. It was kind of not that exciting a trip overall. I don't have a particularly positive view of that now. But 5 years from now, when I'm going back and telling someone about the time I was teaching in Albania and I went to Greece for a week at the height of the economic crisis and saw all these homeless people and was wandering around the Parthenon and all of these things, it's probably going to be quite an impressive looking memory for me. In the same way, if we take a trip somewhere for a funeral, it might have been a very pleasant trip. You saw all your family, all your extended family members. My mother passed away a little bit less than a year ago, but she'd had cancer for quite a while, so we all knew she was going to die. So going home for the funeral wasn't a real big deal. It was a chance to get to see everyone, and obviously we were all a little bit sad, a little bit introspective. So 5 years from now, I'm probably going to look back on that particular trip as being particularly bleak and sad and unpleasant, when in fact it was fine. It was a very nice trip. I would put it ahead of Greece, in fact. And then reconstructing our past behavior. Hindsight bias involves memory revision. What we mean here is when you find out the subsequent information, you'll be using hindsight. Hindsight means to look behind you, to look back. And they have an expression in English, hindsight is always 20/20. Okay, if your vision is perfect, you have 20/20 vision. My vision is corrected to 20/20 vision. And they say when you look back, you're obviously looking back knowing more information, but you will convince yourself that I suspected that my girlfriend was cheating on me, when you had no idea, but you seem to remember it that way. So your behavior in breaking up with her, you kind of explained, I knew there was something wrong. Examples given here in surveys, people remember smoking far fewer cigarettes than are actually sold. I don't know how they quantify this, but obviously they're taking a fairly small sample size and asking smokers, how many cigarettes do you smoke a day? Maybe asking people who buy their cigarettes in the same place, whatever, a control group. This can be done. You can figure out how to do this. So we know that 1,000 cigarettes were sold to the combined population of this school over the course of a year. It's not very many cigarettes. I'm not very good at math. And yet we only remember smoking 750 of them, because I really don't smoke that much. It's half a pack a day. And same thing here, people recall voting at a higher rate than people actually vote. As you know, in the United States, or as I should hope you know, in the United States, we're not required to vote. It's not the law. Some countries it's the law, you must vote. In the United States, you don't have to vote. And so even in a presidential election year, something like only 50% or a little bit more in a very exciting year, something like 55% of eligible voters actually vote. So there you go. It's interesting. One of the ways that you can be accurate about this, I learned this in, I think I was taking a physical education class once in college. We were allowed to take a couple hours as electives. And this guy had us write down exactly what we ate for the whole 8 weeks of the course. It was kind of interesting, exactly what your portion size was. And, and so instead of going back and saying, oh, I didn't, I ate pretty healthy this weekend, you go back and every single meal is written down and you start, wow, I'm eating too much junk food or I'm drinking too much beer, which is something I'm guilty of from time to time. Okay, overconfidence. Confidence is a good thing. Confidence gives us higher motivation, persistence, energy, optimism, and can allow us to accomplish things that we might not otherwise have undertaken. Confidence contributes to happiness. But overconfidence, the overconfidence phenomenon, the tendency to be more confident than correct, the tendency to overestimate the accuracy of one's beliefs and judgments, okay? We all know that there's some objective truth, and we all believe that we are the ones that are capable of sorting all that information, looking at these people, making a snap judgment, this is a good student, this is a bad student, and interpreting the situation. I'm trying to figure out which student is cheating on a test. I'm quite sure someone is. Seems to be a little bit of whispering every time I turn my back, right? I'm the one who has to decide, is there someone cheating? And if they are, is it one person cheating off another or two people complicit? I suffer from overconfidence in that I'm likely to believe that I'm capable. I have the off and not a danger to you. So this is where the representativeness heuristic was working against that woman, or just as importantly in terms of our social perception of the world, she might have just been locking her door. I know people who lock their doors every time they get in the car. My dad does it, which I find kind of strange, but anyway, he does it. The friend I mentioned who's married and has a couple kids, he does it all the time too. In this case, you do it because you got little kids and you don't want them opening the door by accident. But that might have just been her thing. She always locks the door, and he experienced it as a response to him being a young black male, which I think is a reasonable way of thinking about things. So, judging our social worlds, here's an example for you folks. Here's a representative heuristic. Linda's 31 years old, single, outspoken, and she's very smart. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and she also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Please choose the most likely alternative. Linda works in a bank, or Linda works in a bank and she is active in the feminist movement. Obviously, I'm not sure what you guys would say to this, but if this was the United States, everybody pretty much would say the second one. She's active in the feminist movement because of her education, her background. We just assume she must be a feminist, which may be entirely untrue. So, how we explain other people's behavior. There's dispositional and situational attributions. There are common sense attributions. There's information integration. There's counterfactual thinking. This would be the example of David Justice, the black guy who's a professional athlete and was not perceived as anything but a potential criminal. There's fundamental attribution error, moods and judgments, and behavioral confirmation. A friend of mine here in Tirana, an American guy I hang around with, he has a very hard time interpreting others' behavior because he always evaluates their behavior based on what he would think in the same situation, given the same knowledge, which is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to try and imagine what it's like being someone else. What would I do if I were Albanian in this situation? As I said, he's American. He does this all the time, and I'm always mystified because he's otherwise a very, very bright guy. Attribution theory, dispositional versus situational attributions. Heider, the founder of attribution theory, suggested that people attribute causes of others' behaviors to internal factors called dispositions or external situational factors, okay? So internal, something that's going on inside you, what your personality is like, dispositions, happy, sad, whatever case may be, or external situational factors. Your team just won the World Cup, or you're in Greece right now and there's a major economic crisis. These are external things to you and influence how you respond to things. Common sense attributions. We use information about consistency, consensus, and distinctiveness when explaining the behaviors of other people. Is Edgar usually unable to get his computer to work? So consistency, does this problem always happen? Okay, a lot of you are usually late for class. Consistently so, whereas if I was late for something, I'm never late, I'm American, so there's something serious going on if I'm late. Could we possibly ask them to tone it down a little bit? Does Edgar have trouble with other computers or only with this one? Distinctiveness, is this unique? And do other people have similar problems with this type of computer? Consensus, so all folks experience this problem. Information integration, how do we combine different pieces of information about a person to form an overall impression? We give more weight to information that is important to us. So to go back to our friend Edgar here, we give more weight to information that is important to us. If I'm really good with computers, then the fact that Edgar is not so good with a computer tends to make me value him less or think of him less, because whatever we are good at is obviously an easy skill to acquire, and you just can't do it because, well, you're unmotivated or something. So what's important to us is what is important in evaluating someone else. That's important to remember. Negative information carries more weight because it's more unusual. So if I introduce you to my boss and I say, well, let's go with my ex-boss. I say he has a very big temper. Be careful, he gets angry. That's negative information. You're not really expecting him to be angry at you, but you're aware of this as you interact with, say you've just gotten hired. How about that? We'll use that instead. You just started working with me at my new job, and I say my boss, Dean Ahmet, has a terrible temper. He gets extremely angry, which is obviously not true, but I give you that impression as a new employee. Be careful, make sure you're here on time all the time. The dean gets very upset. People tend to give more weight to information received first. The primacy effect, I just gave you an example of that as well. What's the dean like? What's your boss like? And I say, ooh, he's okay to work for, but boy, don't get him mad. He gets a real big temper, okay? That's gonna stick with you. And first impression colors our judgment of later observations of behavior. So I have a good anecdote for you on that, but we won't do that particular one. But we can all think of a time when we met someone and made a bad first impression and then had to fix it, where for whatever reason you're talking to a person who you find attractive and you accidentally spill something on them or do something clumsy, and they think you're either a socially awkward person or something like this, and you have to fix that as you get to know them better. Counterfactual thinking, easily imagined, cognitively available events also influences our experience of guilt, regret, frustration, and relief. Example that I was seeing here is people who barely do something or just barely are unable to do something. And the example that was being used today was in grades. If I give one of you a B, which is an 85 in the United States, that's right middle of the road, that's a B. Most of you are like, well, I was pretty far away from an A, so whatever, and you're happy enough. But if you get like an 89 or an 88, and you're very close to an A, you're much more frustrated, and you're much more likely to play that over and over again in your head, what you could have done differently. I wish I hadn't been late. I missed that one quiz, it's terrible. This is a very common phenomenon. Fundamental attribution error. Why do we make this error? This is our own perspective and awareness of a situation. There's also cultural differences. Example here, we have a student who's laying on a desk while other students in the background are working. Actually, I think this guy's texting, which is terrible. So what we don't know is this student unmotivated or bored, which is an internal factor, or is this student having problems at home where he's not sleeping enough? So is it a lack of sleep? or something external in his life that is not allowing him to participate fully in class. A tendency for observers to underestimate situational influences and overestimate dispositional influences on others' behavior. I am likely then, as this kid's teacher, to think that there's something wrong with him inside. He's lazy, he lacks motivation, and we don't pay attention to what the social influences may be. What if he's Greek and he's having to work every night because his family needs the money? They can't afford to hire anyone to work in their restaurants, and so he works and also goes to school. We tend to think of ourselves that we act as a result of external conditions. We act in response to our environment, but we tend to think that others act because of internal motivation and not in response to environment. This is quite common. So moods and judgment often obviously are going to affect our social perception. Social judgment involves efficient, though fallible, information processing. Fallible basically means possible to be wrong, flawed information processing. It also involves our feelings. Our moods infuse our judgments. We're not cool computing machines, we are emotional creatures. So people who are going through a sad time, such as their mother has passed away recently, are more likely to have a negative perception of either a neutral event or a positive event. Whereas people who are a little bit happier because they've just had a birthday or an anniversary, got some presents, are more likely to see a neutral or somewhat negative event in a positive light. Glass is half full, glass is half empty. We also have behavioral confirmation, what we also call the self-fulfilling prophecy. When English soccer fans, I should say went, but same difference, came to France for the 1998 World Cup, they were expected to live up their reputation as aggressive hooligans. Of course, most of you follow soccer a lot more closely than I do, but I think you'll remember 1990 in Italy, the British were stuck off on an island where they didn't sell alcohol to try and keep hooliganism down. As we can see here, this is obviously a British fan. I assume these are all British fans. We call this a self-fulfilling prophecy because we expect the British fans to act like hooligans. Any action like this confirms our expectation of British fans. They're bad, they're crazy, they can't be trusted. Whereas I know the German fans are just as bad, but we don't expect the violence from German fans. But they certainly are just as guilty of it. I don't know about Albanian fans. Has Albania ever been to a World Cup? I'm not sure, I doubt it. I do not know. In judging others, we tend to think without awareness. We have this overconfidence in our ability to intuit the correct information, or judgmental overconfidence. First impression influences us very strongly, along with these intuitive judgments and our heuristics, these rules of thumb that in a certain classroom situation, this is how I respond, not completely acknowledging that this might be totally unique. What else do we base our assumptions on, or our impressions of others? 4 major factors here: physical appearance, nonverbal communication, or what we also call body language, familiarity, and by this it doesn't mean necessarily that we know the person, but let's say culturally similar to us. I can interpret the body language of an American much more successfully than I can interpret the body language of an Albanian. Simple enough. And just general behavior. Here's a good anecdote for you. I once was buying a house in the United States, and I had made an appointment to go to the town where I wanted to buy the house. It was about a 2-hour drive. I had called the real estate office and said, hello, my name's Peter Brown. I would like to come look at some property on whatever day. It was on a weekend, so let's say it was a Saturday. Might have been a Sunday. Real estate offices are usually open on the weekends. And so I get up there, I finally find this office. I didn't know where it was. I finally found it. And the woman I'd made an appointment with would not take me to go see a house unless I had a credit check first. The credit check cost money, and she wanted me to pay for a credit check before she would take me to see any of the properties that I had made an appointment to see with her. This seemed to me to be unfair, that you're asking me to pay for a service just for the right to see properties that you are selling. And I said, let me talk to your boss. I was a little bit upset, politely so. I said, you go get me your boss. I want a different agent, and do it now. It turned out that this woman I was talking to, she was the daughter of the woman who owned the real estate agency. But anyway, so when the boss came out, I'm standing there talking to her. I'm giving her a piece of my mind. I drove up here, 2-hour drive. I made an appointment, et cetera, a little bit upset. She had already gone around and gotten another agent, and I saw him out of the corner of my eye, and he was looking at me. He was a young man, hadn't been selling real estate very long. He was looking at me and obviously thinking, what am I getting into here? I was a lot bigger than him. I was obviously already upset with his company. And anyway, so eventually she calls him over and says, Ronnie, this is Peter Brown, da-da-da. He says he's got a list of properties he wants to see. Why don't you take them out and show him? Well, it turned out Ronnie was brand new at his job. He was, not very experienced salesman, but he had a bad first impression of me. He realized very quickly that I was a young college professor. I was interested in buying a house. I was very motivated to get it done right away. And I ended up being that guy's very first salesperson. He sold his first house to me. So good for him. It wasn't a big, huge commission, but we got over that initial bad first impression, my first impression of his company, his first impression of me. We got over all that, and I bought a house from his company. So we make our first impressions based on these physical things, or these 4 things, I should say. And what we're going to look at now are some pictures. We also have intuitive judgments. Pictures are coming up. Our mind immediately knows something without reasoning or analysis. Our thinking is partly controlled, reflective, deliberate, conscious, but it's also reflexive. And we have a quotation here from Pascal: the heart has its reasons which reason does not know, or as they like to say, we do not know what we do not know. We're generally pretty good at deciding whether or not someone is happy or sad. And from what I understand, it doesn't matter what culture you're from or what race you're looking at. You can usually tell with quite a degree of accuracy someone's emotional state. Might not be perfectly on, but if I say happy, sad, content, angry, in most cultures, you can look at someone's face and you can tell, and it doesn't matter whether you're experienced dealing with people from that particular race or that people from that part of the world. It's just relatively easy to do. Okay, so what are our assumptions about this here? So I can tell you what mine are. I'll let you look at picture A and B here. I apologize, B, for not being over picture B, but we have 2 workspaces. 2 cubicles here. Obviously same company. Looks like they're using Macintoshes, but I could be wrong about that. So, person on the left is, our first impression is generally negative. Person on the right, we should be more or less positive here. We have a nice filing thing over here. Everything's very neat. I myself tend to exist much more in this kind of environment, except for the food. I don't really leave food laying around. But when people ever comment upon my desk, I always say, messy desk is a sign of an active mind. That means I have a lot of projects going on. Why do I want to put away this project in some file? This to me says this person is ready to get out of here and ready to go home every day at 5 o'clock. They put everything away like that. I tend to leave things out, but again, that's my perception of my life. Again, I don't like dirty dishes. I definitely get rid of that. Okay. Take a moment to look at this gentleman. Judge for yourself. Is this person's expression cruel or kind? I think I would say this is a kind expression, or sympathetic, seems to be listening if I were speaking. Now we can influence your perception. If I don't know who this is, but just the way that he looks, what if he's a Nazi war criminal? What if he's one of Adolf Hitler's boys, all involved in the final solution and killing Jewish people? That changes our perception. If I said we're going to look at a series of war criminals to see how normal they look, you would probably say this person looks a little bit kind of warlike, not trustworthy, because you've already been given a bias. Have some pictures coming up of people with different hairstyles. I'm not sure how this is going to go or how this is presented in your book. So we can see here, this guy has kind of an odd hairstyle in both pictures. It's the same fellow. You can make the argument that his mouth is slightly different. Here, slightly wider, but he's not really smiling in either picture. And you have to make a decision which is a happier person or which is the one who's more approachable. I don't really know the answer on this. I have no idea what they're doing with these hairstyles. But according to physiognomy studies, human beings, regardless of race, tend to find people more approachable and more friendly who have a full, round face, curly hair, large eyes. We always hear this expression in English about someone who has beady eyes, someone who has small eyes. They're not trustworthy. Large eyes are more sympathetic. People like eye contact a lot. People tend not to trust people who don't make eye contact. I'm bad that way. When I'm talking to people intimately, I often look away as I think, and that's a sign of deceit to a lot of people. They think I'm lying or I'm afraid or something like this, and I'm not. I just tend to look away when I'm thinking. So round face, curly hair, large eyes, a short nose, full lips. I would characterize these as full lips, and an upturned mouth. I think not a frown, not necessarily a smile. Both of these expressions are pretty neutral. Have a woman here, very little difference here, slight difference in the mouth. Again, it's just the haircut that's different. Not 100% sure what we're trying to do here. But on a personal basis, you should find one of these more sympathetic. This next one's kind of funny. Here's the curly hair. For some reason, I find the guy on the right to be more approachable. Obviously, it's the same guy. Maybe because the guy on the right looks like his hair has actually been shaped that way, whereas this guy looks like that's just how his hair is every day. I had a friend in college who had naturally curly hair, and you don't have a lot of options when your hair is like that. It's just like that. This here, slightly different expression. It's an interesting picture. So you can see we've done something with this eyebrow here, where there's kind of some judgment going on. Mouth slightly more sympathetic here. but not much expression in the eyes, whereas here the eyes seem more interactive, but a little bit firmer mouth. Not too sure what to make of that. Again, some of that is our own perception. One of these is a very famous guy who's dead now, and one of these guys is a not very famous guy, but I know who he is because I happened to read a book that he was in, which is this guy. I didn't write his name down, I apologize for that, doesn't matter. This is Robert Oppenheimer, who was an American physicist who's most famous or best known for inventing, running the Manhattan Project, where they invented the atomic bomb during World War II. He was the chief of that particular program. The guy on the left is a college dropout who has tested frighteningly high on IQ tests, definitely a super genius. But never managed to finish college. He experimented with college once, didn't work out, I think because of financial aid reasons. He didn't have enough money to continue, and then eventually went to a cheaper college, and that didn't work out. He was trying to support himself, comes from a dysfunctional family where he didn't have a lot of help from his parents, a lot of stepfathers involved in his life, but both very brilliant men. In terms of overcoming adversity, Robert Oppenheimer was a guy who had some problems, emotional problems earlier in life, that he really shouldn't have been successful. But because of his socioeconomic background, he managed to still be successful. He got his PhD when he was 22 years old, which is about the age most of you are getting your bachelor's degree. And I believe he went to school in England at either Oxford or Cambridge, I forget which. So a very bright guy, obviously, but he had some mental issues that should have untracked his career, and he managed to get it on track, whereas this guy overcame great family adversity, great family difficulties, but because of those difficulties, socioeconomic mostly, and not having the educational preparation to succeed in a traditional educational environment, he probably didn't go as far in his life as he should have. At one point, they made a reality TV show out of him competing with 100 people to see if they could outsmart him on whatever, the trivia test, kind of like Millionaire, but it was 100 people against one or something like that. Not too important. This guy here is an actor. Most of you are familiar with the Star Trek franchise. The original television show had this guy on it, Dr. Spock. I grew up on this stuff. He was a half human, half